Welcome to this session of the Ancestral Healing Summit with my guest, Brandon Jones. Our topic today is the legacy of trauma, the African American experience. Brandon Jones is a psychotherapist, professor, and author who specializes in adverse childhood experiences and historical and intergenerational trauma. His passion is helping you live life with purpose, on purpose, by healing from your past, dealing with your present, and developing for your future. Brandon, thank you so much for making the time to join us today. Welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It is an honor to be on this program.
Well, it's our honor to have you because you're doing such important work. As I mentioned, our topic for today is the legacy of trauma, the African American experience. And this is such a huge, important topic that affects not just the lives of African Americans, but the entire culture of the United States. So let's lay out some groundwork first. Let's talk first about how do the experiences of the past impact the current state of African Americans?
Absolutely. So unfortunately, one of the things that I have uncovered in my work and even in my personal life is understanding the impacts of trauma. And over the years, what I've learned about historical and intergenerational trauma is that there's a theory called transmissions theory. And the experiences of our ancestors and even of our parents, grandparents, etc., they have a direct connection to you physiologically, so your actual body, and in behavior and culture. And unfortunately for African American folks who have slavery in their lineage, that trauma that they've experienced has carried over through behaviors and through stress. So the work that I do is typically addressing stress and making sure that folks understand that how lineage connects to what's currently going on with them from a mental and emotional standpoint today. There is a woman by the name of Dr. Joy DeGruy-Leary who has a pretty popular book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And in that book, she was one of the leading people to really uncover this concept of how trauma is transmitted from one generation to the next. There's another person by the name of Dr. Yellowhorse Braveheart, Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart, who has also done historical trauma work when it comes to Native American folks. So Dr. Joy, she did it more with African American folks, where she looked at slave narratives and started to hear and see things in the slave narratives that show up in people's lives today. So she was able to make that connection. For myself, I was able to see how my trauma started before I was even born by learning about my own personal history, and I was able to connect those dots as well. I was born from a teenage mom. My mother was pregnant with me when she was in high school. She walked across the stage with me in her belly, had me a few weeks later on July 4th. And I grew up in a household full of trauma and drama. Unfortunately, I seen a lot of domestic violence as a kid. And the domestic violence that I experienced was extremely traumatic. However, I didn't realize the traumatic effects of it later until adulthood, where I was like, wow, all the stuff that I seen, the stuff that I experienced, even some of the violence that was torn towards me had an effect on my mood. I was at this point, now I can say I was definitely clinically depressed as a teenager. I used to overcompensate with eating. I had low self-esteem a lot. I wouldn't be as assertive, and all that stuff stemmed back from the trauma that I experienced as a kid. So there is a lineage, there is a connection to the experience that people have that lead up till today. And unfortunately, slavery was one of those for African Americans. And then after slavery, we had Jim Crow, which was pretty much like serfdom, if you want to compare it to other places in the world, where African American folks attempted to conform into this American idea, but unfortunately, due to racism and race actually becoming a thing and categorized in the United States, African American folks continued to struggle. And the struggle had continued on really until the civil rights movement came, and then we got integration and other policies that are put in place. And then it turned into a whole nother type of experience of how do we gel and mold based on this, pretty much racist history that we've had, where Black people have been excluded policy-wise and just interpersonally as well. So it wasn't just an interpersonal thing, it was also a structural thing that many Black people has faced. And unfortunately, it still leads up to today, where we're still looking at human rights violations. We're still looking at ways for us to commingle and relate to other groups, and facing a lot of discrimination, prejudices, and things of that nature. So it's a huge issue that unfortunately also spills within the community, where we respond to each other from a particular type of way as well, due to the trauma that we've experienced.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Well, thank you for that foundation.
Hmm.
Um, oh, there's so many different directions we could go
Oh
with
yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Let's start out with sort of the hidden things, the things that people don't even realize are happening in their lives. I
Correct.
saw you in an interview recently. You're talking about a woman who was videotaped disciplining her son, and
Yes.
the way that she reacted. Um, on subtle levels was sort
Yes.
of I'll let you tell the story.
Yeah,
Tell me
very
about
interesting. Yeah. So there was a video that went viral not too long ago of African American woman who came to the school of her son. Her son was misbehaving in school, so she obviously got a call from some staff at the school and showed up there. But the interaction that happened when she got there, and the reason why the video went viral, was very disturbing. She was responding to this child like an adult one, so she was yelling at him, calling him names, disparaging names, threatening him, threatening to bash his face in, and things like this. So these are just negative parenting concepts, things that you don't want to ever see a parent do, regardless if they're African American or not. But this woman had actually took it to that level with this child. The disturbing parts also about this were the school professionals did not intervene with this interaction. They kind of just let it go. And the clip is about 3 to 4 minutes long. It's a pretty long clip and very disturbing to watch. And they didn't interact. They didn't interfere. But there was a point in time in the actual clip, an incident, where the mom bumped one of the professionals and was so polite to the professional, but not to her own child. And that, unfortunately, is one of those historical trauma things that shows up that people might not be aware of, is how we interact with other ethnic groups and other people. And we have a higher level of respect because, unfortunately, in the system that we are in today, we have a hierarchical kind of color caste system that we respond to. So this person was a white person, and she was very polite. Oh, sorry, ma'am, I didn't mean to hit you. And then she went right back in on her child and was swearing at him and yelling at him and really belittling him. And this kid was like maybe 7, 8 years old, couldn't have been no more than 8, a very young child. And just that disregard for her own child and that disconnection does have a lineage to slavery. Unfortunately, it does. And then those behavior patterns and those parenting patterns, unfortunately, have carried on from one generation to the next. And this mother, obviously has seen that type of parenting somewhere in her life and assumed that that was acceptable, and it's not. And we know that that is very abusive. And what we know about trauma work today, that those experiences that that young man's dealing with at this current time may carry on with him until he's adult. And that's unfortunate. The reason why I make that connection from today to slavery is that there's a lot of narratives and there's a lot of stories, even within the African American community, and things that have been documented about how Black mothers on plantations would respond to their children. They would belittle them. They would say things to them that were negative in front of like overseers and slave masters and things like that. And it was a strategy to protect the child and keep the child with them. So you would have slave mothers say things like, oh, little Bobby, he's slow. Hey, he's slow. He's no good. He can't work. He's dumb. He's lazy. They'll say things like that as a form of protection to keep the child with them instead of having the child taken and working at either another plantation or another place in that actual plantation. So that was a very common practice. It was a strategy that unfortunately was carried over and has become and manifested into something more negative. And we haven't been able to break that pattern 100% as far as how to interact with our kids without disparaging them, swearing at them, or hitting them. Another thing is spankings. It's a huge thing in the community that's always kind of a topic of discussion when we talk about things like child protection, is spankings and how do spankings go too far. And unfortunately, in the African American community, we were cultivated under physical discipline. If a slave got out of line, they could have limbs chopped off. They could be beat nearly to death to be made as an example. They could be sexually abused. All these things were forms of discipline that unfortunately have carried over for a lot of folks generation to generation. So it's a big thing. And when you look at it, we look at history and compare it to today, you start to connect those dots and see just how we got to where we are today, unfortunately.
Right, right. And as I mentioned earlier, this is such a big picture.
Yeah.
Where do you even begin?
For me, you begin with yourself and your own narrative. It's very easy to look at history. We're not taught we're not taught the truth when it comes to what slavery was really all about, because it really was an economic system at the end of the day. It was harmful, it was hurtful to both Native Americans and African Americans. And I would even say to, at the time, what we now call white people, because they weren't called white at that time. People were like Polish or, or Italian, etc. And those folks kind of came on later as well as they immigrated to the United States. But it really hurt us there. So we can look at that part of history, but what's more important is looking at yourself and how have those experiences informed your life today. People are dealing with a lot of pain and trauma today, and it's hard for them to connect it back because, one, they don't know their own personal narratives. They don't know their own personal histories. If you know a Black person and you ask them where they come from, like where are your people from, they're going to usually identify a state, a city, or a town. They're not going to identify a country. So the lineage is not even there. And this is where you hear a lot of Black folks, we talk about, we need to know our history, and our history needs to be taught in schools, but we also have a responsibility to teach that history ourselves as well, because we can't just rely on schools to teach it, because schools have other ramifications and things, etc. So starting with your own personal self is very important, because that gives you a grounding and a context for who and how you became the person that you are.